What is up, fellow nerds, and welcome back to the Dapper Snapper Gaming channel, and welcome back to How Do I Want to Do This? This is our series where we take a look at all playable options available to players in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, then we rank them on a scale of 1 to 10 and either build them or fix them depending on how they rank. Now today we finish up our talks on the Way of the Long Death Monk, as we are going to be building one today because it did pass our ranking from back on Tuesday. So if you have not checked that video out, of course that will be up in the iCard above for you to check out first so that you can get all the details on this subclass. But I am super pumped about jumping into this build. I think it's going to be a fun one. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. But before we do, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. As you can see, most people who watch the channel are not subscribed. So please don't be one of those people. Help us to reach our goal of 5,000 by the end of this year. I think we can do it, but I need your help in order to get there. And of course, one of the best ways to support the channel would be to click the bell so you're notified when new videos are uploaded, and share the video with your friends. Another option to supporting this channel, of course, is memberships. I mentioned these on all of my build guides, but down below there is that join button where you can press that, and for only $2 a month, you can, of course, join the channel at the silver level and get access to all of my build guides and subclass fix guides. And of course, going higher than that gives you some awesome benefits as well. Silver members, of course, get a shout out. Speaking of which, all of our silver members right here on the screen, thank you so much for all of you who are silver and above. And of course, you also get access to my videos a full day early. So that way you can weigh in and be the first one to see all of these and what we've come up with. And of course, the gold tier, which is the top tier, is what will give you access to a special part of the Discord server. And you also will get a priority pick of our variety builds month to month. Of course, this month's build is already set in stone, but I am looking for what to do for next month's variety build where I am not tied to any kind of subclass and just do whatever. And so, yeah, of course, if you go into that gold tier, your suggestions will go to the top of that list. So that is one amazing way to support the channel. Of course, it is by no means required or even expected, but it is just another way for you to support the channel and help me to do what I do. So the Way of the Long Death Monk, of course, is a death-obsessed type of monk, and so this lends itself to a really interesting character concept, someone that is normally very zen and very calm, but yet is very focused on dying and death and that whole process, which can be very interesting. And so I think that this can lead to a really fun character, and I've definitely taken several choices this week in the spirit of fun over the spirit of necessarily being overpowered. But hopefully you all will like what I've come up with. Without any further ado, let's jump right in. Starting off, as always, we have our race, and I wanted to pick something off the wall for this week. I did not want to go variant human. I didn't want to go custom lineage, although it would probably be optimal to go that way. We'll talk about that in the honorable mentions, but yeah, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something that I've not done in a really long time, if at all, on the channel, and just something that's super niche and just more of a flavor pick than anything. So today we're going to be picking the Dampier. The Dampier was, of course, introduced in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and this is how you are kind of a vampire person, which is super, super cool, right? We're obsessed with death, right? But we're also a monk, and so I feel like a Dampier monk is just a really cool flavor piece, and it just really fits this subclass perfectly. There are a few things that we get, of course, as a Dampier, which actually makes this a pretty decent race option. So number one, we of course get +1s to 3 different stats, which is kind of the new way that they decided to do stats going into some of the newer books, which I'm totally cool with. We actually have an increased walking speed over most other creatures. We have a 35-foot move speed, which is pretty cool. So of course, this is going to help scale our unarmored movement even more, which is great. We get dark vision, which is great. We don't need to breathe, so that comes with some pretty cool implications. Spider climb, which is also nice. Most importantly, though, we get our vampiric bite. Now, this is interesting because while we're limited in number of times that we can use this per day, we actually can make this a decently powerful option. So the thing is, this is a simple melee weapon, even though it is considered technically a natural weapon. Because it is a simple melee weapon, it is therefore going to be counted as a monk weapon for the purposes of martial arts. which means that the damage is not going to be tied to a D4. It is instead going to scale with our martial arts die, which is going to only make this more and more effective. Now, the damage that you're going to deal with this is not going to be insane, so I wouldn't expect it to be as much, but you can gain advantage if you're particularly hungry, aka hurt, and so that's pretty cool. And you can also give yourself bonuses to your next ability check or attack roll, which is pretty awesome. So either way, this is a really, really cool feature. So we're going to be making it even more effective as we go as a monk. Now, keep in mind, I'm not going to be focusing down on this as the main source of our damage dealing, just because it would take too long to come online for it to be really that effective. But it is going to be something to consider as a backup option to our main kind of strategy. And so, yeah, definitely something to think about. But I wanted to go with a flavor pick this week, and so that is what we have done. For our stats, of course, we're going with our modified standard array as always. If you're going with point buy, if you're using regular standard array, or you're using some other system, your stats will look different than mine, and that's totally fine. Just adapt and keep the top 3 in your top slots, and you don't need the bottom 3. For our top stat, we're actually going to focus in wisdom this week. This is going to help us in several ways. Of course, our stunning strike DC and our DC from our abilities that we're going to be getting in our subclass as well. There is a saving throw involved there, and so making that our focus is going to be a little bit more important. Next in line, of course, is dexterity, and following that is going to be constitution. So those are pretty normal, and then the bottom 3 don't really matter, so it's really whatever you want to do. As far as equipment, I probably just will go with the quarterstaff this time around. There are other builds which we'll talk about that may use different weapons like that. I'm just going to focus on doing the quarterstaff kind of shenanigans, and nothing too crazy on this build, although you do have other options with the dedicated weapon feature. And so if you feel like doing something different, you can, but this build is going to focus more so on using the quarterstaff. So let's start taking some levels now. Starting off at level 1, we're going to be a monk 1. I normally go around and start at different classes, and if you wanted to start at fighter, you can, but honestly, I don't think that I'm gonna need to take any fighter levels on this build. I'm not planning to do that. There is going to be some light multi-classing, but it's not going to be in fighter. So yeah, we're doing something a little different this time, but getting martial arts right off the bat is going to be nice because that is going to allow our quarterstaff attacks to be a little bit more effective, going to be tying off of our dexterity rather than our strength, which our strength is likely going to be dumped. And so, yeah, you're not going to want to use that. You would rather just go with our dexterity here. And of course, that will scale as we go. Then, of course, we get unarmored defense. And so this is going to allow us to have a more effective AC than we normally would, which is pretty cool as well. Going on to second level, we are going to multi-class. Yes, we're already at level 2. We're already multi-classing. It's really early to be doing this, but I want to go ahead and get kind of the flavor in here that I'm going for, and go ahead and multi-class 1 level now, and then we'll come back and grab the second level in this class a little bit later on, once we get some more monk levels under our belt. For this multi-classing option, I considered a few things, and of course, honorable mentions, we will mention those at the very end of the video, but we ended up going with the cleric. The cleric seemed to make the most sense here because there are a couple of clerics that kind of fit this theme as far as that goes. But even more so, there are some clerics that also just fit mechanically in what it is that we're trying to do. For this build, we're going to go with the Grave Cleric. The Grave Cleric is one of my favorite clerics out there. I know it's not the most OP thing out there, but it is really, really cool. And I just like playing them. I think that they're just so much fun. The range Spare the Dying that we of course get right off the bat is really, really helpful with Circle of Mortality. Eyes of the Grave can be nice and definitely fits in what it is we're trying to do. We also of course get Bane and False Life for free, and we'll get of course some other spells in there as well. But the big thing, this is why we're focusing on our wisdom, right? We're going to have these options here, and I think it just makes more sense to focus down on this, and we're going to give ourselves even more reason in just a few levels. For our cantrips, of course, with our spell casting, we of course get Spare the Dying for free, which is one that I normally would take anyway, so that's helpful. Plus it is now buffed to a bonus action and at range, which is great. But on top of that, I would probably take things like Guidance. I would probably take Toll the Dead. And then if you want to take like Sacred Flame, that's also an option. But Toll the Dead is going to be the main one that I would say to take if you're really far away and can't close the distance for some reason, or just want to stay safe. Then you can of course do that, and that is a really good option for you. For first level spells, of course, we get Bane and False Life for free, but for other options, you know, we've got things like Command, we've got things like Cure Wounds, Guiding Bolt, Inflict Wounds. The two that I would definitely take are Healing Word and Shield of Faith. Now, with being a Grave Cleric, we of course can maximize our healing whenever someone is at 0 hit points. And so that just makes Healing Word that much more effective. And this gives us, of course, a range option to get up, right? And so if we're not going to be Flurry of Blows, if we're not going to be using our Step of the Wind or whatever it is that turn, this gives us a great option to get somebody back up in a really effective way. And so I think that's really helpful. And of course, Shield of Faith is a really nice concentration option in order to make you a little bit harder to hit, just giving you that little bit of a bonus to AC. At level 3, we're going to be a Monk 2, and so I want to go ahead and grab Key and its related features, just because it is, you know, the main reason why we're here, which is really good. Of course, Unarmored Movement also kicks in at this level, and so you will of course be able to move quicker, and that will of course increase as we level up as well. We also get Dedicated Weapon, which we're not going to be making use of on this specific build, but there are types of Long Death Monks that I've seen people do that do take advantage of this, and we'll discuss that of course in the honorable mentions. At level 4, we will be a Monk 3, and we finally get our subclass, and so we get our Touch of Death feature, which just means that we can get some temporary HP back whenever we knock out an enemy. Now, you'll want to talk to your DM about the Bag of Rats strat as to whether or not this is something that is allowed. So there are some people who will bring around a bag full of some kind of small creature, and you can either just kill it or, you know, non-lethal, drop it to 0 HP, whatever you want to do, and then you get these temporary HP. Some DMs, of course, will consider this cheap and kind of a cheaty way to do it, but technically it is rules as written, so definitely something to talk to your DM about before you start doing this kind of a thing. And then, of course, we get Deflect Missiles, which is fine, and, of course, Key Fueled Attack, which we're probably not going to make a huge amount of use of on this build either, but it's an option if it happens to come up. At Monk 4, we get our first ASI or feat, and I'm actually going to take a feat. Now, it is probably more optimal to take the ASI and bump Wisdom or bump Dexterity, but I really think that taking a feat here is going to help us to be a little bit more effective. You may not agree, and that's totally fine, but I'm going to go ahead and take Magic Initiate, focusing on the Druid. Now, of course, a lot of people will take Custom Lineage and then take this feat as their first level thing, but I wanted to go for flavor, and so here we are. So for your cantrips, the main one is going to be Shillelagh. Shillelagh will allow you to attack with your Wisdom modifier rather than your Dexterity modifier when you are making attacks with a wooden weapon, and of course our quarterstaff is, and so that's going to help us out a lot. It is going to boost the amount of damage that we deal. It's going to make it easier for us to hit, and it allows us to just really focus down on Wisdom for our spell casting and for our actual martial prowess, which are both very important to this character. For other options, I would probably take Thorn Whip, which is a nice option to move people around on the battlefield. Forced movement is always going to be effective, and so that's definitely something to consider. And for our first level spell, I've got a couple options. Once per day Entangle is probably not terrible, and also Fog Cloud are not bad either. Either one of those options are pretty good for first level, or if you wanted to not prepare something like Healing Word or something as your spell for Cleric, then that's fine, but I would be careful with that just because you only do get to cast this once per day according to the actual rules of Magic Initiate. A lot of people will, of course, homebrew this feat to match things like the Fey Touched and the Shadow Touched feats, just to where it is if you have slots left, you can continue casting it. If that's how it works at your table, then that's fine, but I'm going to assume that it's rules as written. At Monk 5, we of course get some of our best features here with Extra Attack and Stunning Strike, along with Focused Aim, which again is not going to be as big of a deal on this build, but we have used this in the past, especially on our Gunk build that we did last week for the Kensei. That'll be up in the icon above. We used a lot of these lesser used Monk features, and it was actually a really, really cool and fun build, so make sure to check that out. But either way, we of course can now attack twice on our turn, or we can of course stunning strike as part of those attacks in order to spend some ki and possibly stun the target, which is really effective and really, really nice to have. At Monk 6, we of course get our Hour of Reaping feature from our subclass, which is going to give us a 30-foot fear effect. Remember that this does not care who is in that radius. It will try to frighten your friends as well. So make sure to get away from your friends before you blow this and then get back out. So yeah, mobility is key here. And of course we have an increased walking speed from Dampier, and we have increased walk speed from just being a monk. So all of that is going to work together for you in order to make this a little bit easier to use, and you're going to have a lot less collateral damage in the process. Now that we have gotten our other subclass feature here, I think that it would be worth going back to Cleric for one more level. Path to the Grave is an insanely good channel divinity option, and while we're going to be limited in how many times we can do this, it's just really good. You give vulnerability to the next attack that hits that creature, which is super, super nice. Of course, we are focused on death and making sure that others go down, right? And so while we may not be the ones that make that attack, that make that final blow for this instance, we can be really good at making sure that our enemies do go down. And so this is a really nice addition. It's, again, one of my favorite things about the Grave Cleric. It's just super, super helpful in being a team player, and that is what we are trying to do in helping to, egg on the death process of our enemies. So now that we've got that, we're going back to Monk, and we are staying Monk the rest of the way. I think it's just best to get as many key points as we possibly can. Of course, we're going to be using those to keep ourselves alive here in not that many levels away. And so having all of that there is going to be really helpful. So at Monk 7, we of course get Evasion, one of our best Monk features out there. Just being able to shrug off damage from things that trigger on a dexterity saving throw. We also get Stillness of Mind, which I'm much less of a fan of, but it is what it is. At Monk 8, we get an ASI or feat, and we're bumping Wisdom. There's no reason not to do that. We're just using Wisdom for everything, for our saving throw for all of our cleric spells, for our saving throw for our Hour of Reaping, for our Stunning Strike DC. We're going to be using it for our level 17 feature eventually. So all of those things culminate in the need for a good Wisdom saving throw. And so that's why we're going to focus on that. And then basically the rest of our ASIs are just going to go to Dexterity. So it is what it is. It's kind of boring in that way, but I think it's the way to make the most effective use of our levels. At Monk 9, we're of course going to get our improvement to our unarmored movement, allowing us to run on vertical surfaces and on liquids, which feels really nice. At Monk 10, we get Purity of Body, which is fine. Again, this really isn't going to come up all that often unless you get caught in a cloud kill. Otherwise, you're probably not going to really deal with this, but it is what it is. At Monk 11, we of course get our Mastery of Death feature, and so this is going to allow us to get ourselves back up from 0 hit points at 1 at the cost of 1 key point. Again, this does not cost your reaction. It doesn't cost anything. So it's very spammable in that way. And so this can make you really, really difficult to take down, especially because you can then get temporary HP by knocking things out, and you can get HP back by dealing damage with your Vampiric Bite as well, which is now up to a D8 as of this level. And so that's also pretty cool. So all of those things kind of culminate into a really, really cool thing that makes you kind of difficult to take down. And of course, you have Evasion for dex saves, and you have Shield of Faith to help with your AC on top of your unarmored defense. So this is actually a somewhat tanky monk build, which is pretty interesting, and I really, really like how it all kind of works together. At Monk 13, we're of course going to get Tongue of the Sun and Moon. I don't care. Literally any wizard can do this at first level. Then at level 14, we're going to get Diamond Soul, one of the best features in the game, giving us proficiency in all saving throws, which feels great. At level 15 in Monk, we get Timeless Body, which is fine. It's more of a flavor piece than anything, but it is what it is. At Monk 16, we of course get an ASI, and like I said, we're just going to bump that dexterity up just to get that as high as we can possibly get it. At level 17 in Monk, we finally get our Touch of the Long Death. And so now one thing to keep in mind about this is that Touch of Death is not technically an attack. And so it does not actually work with Path to the Grave, which is unfortunate. Not that we could do it technically in the same turn, but it's just something that doesn't work out together, which is a little unfortunate. I wish it did, but it doesn't. So that is one thing to be careful of for sure. And then finally, level 20, Monk 18, we get Empty Body, which is a little disappointing for a capstone, but you know, it's better than probably taking another level of Cleric just to get second level Cleric spells. That's it. I'd probably rather have the extra key point in order to keep myself up. So that is our build for today. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Again, the full build guide is available by joining the channel at the lowest level. Let's go ahead and jump into our honorable mentions here. And so starting off with other racial options, there are several that are actually pretty decent here. And the first one, of course, is going to be the Tabaxi. The Tabaxi gives us additional move speed on a somewhat limited basis, but it's absolutely worth it. Again, getting in and out for our Hour of Reaping is going to be really, really important. And being able to increase our move speed temporarily, especially with it being as high as it is going to be really, really nice for something like this. We also have something like the Dwarf. Now, I want to consider talking about the Dwarf here. We'll come back to what the Dwarf is effective in, but there is a really interesting way to do the Long Death Monk that actually uses armor and does not focus on using a lot of the features that monks actually get. It would instead have a more tank focused kind of way of doing this. And so we'll talk about that in just a second with the option for multi-classing. Finally, the Half Orc is a really nice option here. The Half Orc, of course, would give us the ability to get back up from 1 HP for free once per day in order to save that 1 key point. And then, of course, key would kick in after that. And so that is another option. I personally think that this is the least effective of the options, but it is something that is flavorful and maybe something of a way to tell the story a little bit more effectively, but that's something to consider for sure. For feat options, I would definitely consider things like Crusher and Piercer. Crusher, of course, can allow you to get out of jail free if you are to blow back a melee enemy by 5 feet. And then Piercer, of course, can make you have really effective crits and other things with your bite. And of course, both of those are half feats, and so that would have boosted your dexterity. We would have gone with like the +2/+1 type of deal and just done those a little bit differently, but it still would have been really, really handy to be able to do something like that. And so definitely something to think about. Some other options would, of course, be the Defensive Duelist one. If you were, again, doing this other type of build, you have to have a finesse weapon in order for this to work. But Defensive Duelist can allow you to be more of a tank type build as well. And finally, actually fighting Initiate is not bad, because if you don't take fighter levels, you of course don't get a fighting style, but you could of course pick up the dueling fighting style here just to deal a little bit of extra damage with your stick. Finally, other multi-class options. Now here's the thing, if you wanted to really make a tank type monk and be wearing armor but still be a monk, there is a way to do that, and that would be going with the Death Domain Cleric. The Death Domain Cleric, of course, gives you armor, and it also gives you access to martial weapons, which could, of course, then go with our dedicated weapon feature, and so it would work that way as well. This is a very niche type of way to do this, and of course, that's where the Dwarf comes in, to where you don't suffer any kind of movement penalty just because there is a strength requirement, so that's something to consider. But at the same time, of course, you're giving up unarmored defense, unarmored movement, you're giving up a lot of these things. And so your Hour of Reaping may suffer a little bit because you're not able to get in and out like what you normally would be able to with most other types of monk builds. It is something to consider, and it's definitely not a bad option by any means. And of course, you can get some other necromancy spells in there, some necromancy cantrips, which are pretty cool. So you get things like Chill Touch, is one of the main ones there, which can really limit your enemies as well, which is pretty cool. So definitely something to consider. And then finally, the Rogue is another really good option. Of course, bringing death to someone and them not even being aware of it is kind of a theme. So the Assassin Rogue is kind of in that theme there. There, of course, is also the Phantom Rogue, which also could really fit this theme as well. And so either way, I think both of those would be really, really fun options. So that is all for today's video. Let me know what you think down below. Next week, we cover the Mercy Monk, one of the newest additions to the Monk, besides Ascendant Dragon, which we've already talked about. But the Mercy Monk is interesting. And so what is it like when a monk is so zen that it would rather help allies than hurting other people? Is that effective? We're just gonna have to find out. So make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already so that you don't miss that. And of course, until next time, stay safe out there, stay healthy. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.